Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is going to be my review of the upcoming Summon Showcase. It's another Gala Dragalia, this time around featuring Gala Chelle. So Gala Chelle has been a really hotly anticipated adventurer. We've had a sense for a while that she was going to come out, but there are tons of fans of her in the Dragalia Lost community who are surely very excited to summon her for the first time here. And I have to say I'm very excited too, but my Wormite is not looking so hot, so I think that this is going to be a tough skip for me, where I instead save for the Persona Showcase that will almost surely start after this, as this ends the day that the Persona Showcase begins. It basically ends at that hour that the Persona event will start. So I'm going to probably have to skip this one, but more power to all of those out there who have been saving up for Gala Chelle, posting in the comments, showing off your stash on Discord and screenshots. I'm very excited for all of you because I really feel like they did Gala Chelle justice here with this variant. She has a whole new look, she has a new hairdo, this clutch that she has that turns into a Manicaster has exploded into this giant Gatling gun that looks awesome. I really feel like they hit the mark with Gala Chelle, and I'm sure Chelle fans are going to be really excited to summon on this, and hopefully, unlike me, your New Year summoning and Dragon Yule summoning didn't drain your Wormite stash as much. Anyway, y'all, we're going to try answer the question of whether or not you should summon in this video, but I really think you should think of this more as a unit analysis and an initial analysis at that. I've done over 50 of these videos now, and the fun part of these is just to look at the characters' kits together, get excited about their skills and abilities and what they bring to Dragalia Lost, and also kind of talk about how they fit into the current meta as far as co-op, and what they might be able to do in solo comps as well. So that's our goal for today. I say all of that because there's a big question mark hanging over the showcase at the time of recording, which is that Legend Kaiyan, the new hardest difficulty light content for which you'd want to bring shadow adventurers such as Chelle, well, that releases tomorrow, so there's a big unknown in that fight, and although a trailer has been posted over on Twitter that gives some teases of what it'll include, we really don't know what that's going to be like, and I'm not going to be able to comment in this video on how Chelle might fit in. In future days, in the next couple days, I'll probably post some clears of that if I'm able to clear it, and at that time I can try comment more on how Chelle might work, but as of today I can't really say anything on that, so we'll really be talking about Master Kaiyan and below in this analysis. Now, there is some good news though, as far as what information we do have access to, and that is, for the first time with the latest version of Dragalia Lost, the devs are actually directly putting in the damage modifiers, the SP costs of these skills. In other words, how many basic attacks or 4 strikes you have to perform before you charge them up, and how much damage they deal. This is information that's always been restricted to third-party sources like the wiki, data mines, etc. We've never had this available directly in-game, and considering how many players summon immediately on day 1, I love that this is now part of the preview that you get for the showcase, because it gives you more information to work off of. Of course, I still recommend that you wait until the last day. You want to see what that next banner is going to be, get that preview, because you never know, you may want to go for that banner instead. And if you're a newer player and have some free summons, maybe you'll get Chelle in your free summons and don't want to go all out on day 1. So those are my considerations for you on this showcase. I think this is mostly going to be for Chelle loyalists who really want her above all else and have saved enough to get her, as well as go for things on Persona. But if you're not in that camp, from what I saw with Chelle's kit, hard to say, but it seems like although she looks good, it's going to be a little bit difficult to fit her into some of the existing comps for Master Kaiyan and below. In Legend, perhaps whole new strategies will emerge and she may be a centerpiece in some of those. We'll know more on that in the next couple of days. So let's go ahead and get into our analysis of Gala Chelle's kit here. She of course has her 2 skills and co-ability, chain co-ability, and 3 abilities. But one thing I want to point out that's only mentioned here at the bottom is that the devs say that Gala Chelle's 4 strikes actually reduce the enemy mode gauge to a greater extent than the standard 4 strike used by other rapid fire Manicaster adventurers. That's pretty good. Rapid fire Manicaster adventurers so far do tend to revolve around using their 4 strike, They kind of work like a Splatling, or yeah, I guess that's a good comparison in Splatoon. Like, you just hold down, stay in one place, and fire using your Force Strike and slowly generate SP over time in this case, about 90 SP per hit, I believe. So, rapid fire Manacasters, it's not a playstyle I have a lot of experience with. I have more experience with the long range style because I have Ilya and I've used her. I don't have Gale Leonidas, haven't tested him, but that is the best comparison point I can think of for Gala Chelle. We'll probably play sort of similar in AI as well, standing back and Force Striking a lot. And besides that detail on her Force Strikes, we'll look at her abilities next. One of them, Star of the Dance 2, increases her first strike damage by 45%, powers it up an additional 30% based on the number of buffs she has, and that's a theme with Chelle. And when she has 5 or more Royal Pride stacks, creates a buff zone around her that reduces damage taken by 10%. Alright, so this is pretty cool. 75% Force Strike damage is no joke. That's a lot of extra Force Strike damage, and the fact that she's reducing the enemy overdrive gauge faster than normal means she's going to be great at breaking bosses. She also has this damage reduction, which seems to create a zone around her, so that's likely to not just apply to her, but also to other members of your team. She needs 5 Royal Pride stacks to use that, so let's read Radiant Scion to learn more about what those are. So Radiant Scion 2 says, when shapeshifting, Chelle will transform into Kat Sheath regardless of what dragon she's equipped with. In addition, using Burlone Gato, her second skill, will grant her the Royal Pride effect for the remainder of the quest. Royal Pride can stack up to 10 times, and each stack reduces damage taken by 1%. So only reducing it by 1% per stack is a little bit low. It's kind of a lot of hoops to jump through 10 times to get a 10% damage reduction, but once you have 5 stacks or more, that's where you're pretty good here, because then you're going to get this passive buff zone around you for the remainder of the quest, I believe, because nothing here talks about removing Royal Pride stacks. So once you get to 5, you're going to have this nice damage reduction aura around you. And even though Chelle herself will only have 5% reduction because of Radiant Scion, she'll get this extra 10% from the aura, and that part will also apply to other characters nearby. The fact that she always transforms into Kat Sheath is kind of just whatever. Kat Sheath's basic attacks as a dragon can cause enemies to fall asleep, so perhaps they'll continue that here. She doesn't have a lot of range as an attacker, but it's likely because this is a special character, they'll give her pretty good damage modifiers, I think, with her transform state's basic attack, so probably not be a bad dragon, but doesn't necessarily have any exceptional qualities either as a dragon. Kat Sheath is more known when summonable for her passive basically giving a lot of skill damage, and there's no aspect of that here. This just affects what Chelle shapeshifts into and what it looks like. So finally, she has Princess's Grace 2 for abilities, reduces susceptibility to blindness and paralysis by 100%. Nice to see dual res on Gala Adventurers, kind of what we expect, and we see it nowadays on non-Galas as well, and a few Galas don't have it, such as Gala Luca, but good to see that here. Both can come in handy against Kayan. I think that what's interesting just reading the abilities so far is that as it looks on paper, like Gala Chelle's going to want to have a strength dragon, and that could potentially be a little bit challenging for her in the shadow element. Shadow's kind of all over the place with its dragons. Like, it has a lot of good dragons, but they tend to serve a few units best. There are dragons like Azazel who provide HP and skill haste, and the skill haste part is good for lots of characters that buff, like Patya. HP is good for characters with life shields and healers like Grace. You have dragons like Ramiel that are used in dragon transformation strategies to fill up your shapeshift gauge. There's Gala Sheath that's used for skill damage intensive characters and for fast clears like with Veronica. Andromeda is a great dragon used on characters like Belina that can reliably stay at low HP. You have Epimetheus, who's used more on characters who want strength like Durant or maybe even Forte. Or you could use Chthonius, a dragon ramping dragon that again works with characters like Forte or Lathna. There's also Fatalis, a monster hunter dragon that is kind of closest to Andromeda but does have a drawback that you get cursed once you shapeshift. So all this to say, because she uses Force Strikes and there's no like 4-strike boosting dragon in Shadow, you're probably going to want a strength boosting dragon. And I think you'd want Epimetheus, but the question is, can you fit poison into whatever comp you're using Gala Chelle with? That may not be a guarantee. Epimetheus is a dragon that provides strength plus poison punisher. If you're not using Epimetheus, I don't know if you can make Andromeda work, because you have to be able to keep Gala Chelle at a low HP, and that's just not necessarily guaranteed. And Fatalis, another alternative, would mean that if you shapeshift, you get cursed, and one of the things that Chelle seems to want to do here is, well, maybe she doesn't want to shapeshift, actually, because you do get Royal Pride stacks for using her Burlone Gato. You don't have to become a cat to get these stacks or anything. So yeah, maybe Fatalis is the best dragon here, but that is a Monster Hunter limited dragon as of now, so not everybody's going to have access to that. I could see this being kind of a problem for making the most of Gala Chelle if a lot of her damage comes from 4 strikes. In any case, scrolling up, her co-ability gauge accelerator is standard on Manacasters, but good to see on her, a character focused on breaking the enemy, dealing a lot of 4-strike damage. It's likely to mean you can break enemies all the faster, and if Kayan on Legend has a Berserk state similar to Volk, all of this will come in handy during that phase, because the longer those phases last, the fewer breaks, the more difficult they seem to be, at least based on Volk, who we have so far. Her chain co-ability Poise, Shadow Blight, Punisher, plus 8%. It's very specific. So the way this works is if enemies are Shadow Blighted and you're in a buff zone, then you get to deal 8% more damage. And with how Gala Chelle's set up, that is going to happen, but it's just very specific. I'm surprised they went this narrow in focus. Like, the characters who can really take advantage of this are Opera Karina, who also causes Shadow Blight and has buff zones, and basically Gala Chelle. But of course, since it's a chain co-ability, it does apply to your whole team, so in solo play, having her on your team, you're probably going to get, for a good part of the fight, an 8% damage boost, or at least on top of your Punisher mods or bracket that you already have. So this is kind of similar to Gala Leaf. Gala Leaf has reduced defense Punisher, something like that, of 8%. Also kind of similar to Sharina, she has Paralyzed Punisher in her chain co-ability slot. Or actually, in her case, I think it's her regular co-ability that she has that. But yeah, this looks okay. Looks like extra damage, which is nice to see. Especially in combination with Gauge Accelerator, which is kind of neutral, but leans toward good, and as far as extra damage, it's definitely not defensive, so it's good to see her chain co-ability isn't either. It certainly doesn't hurt her, but I am surprised that they made it that specific. Alright, so as for her skills, this is where things get interesting. Her skills are expensive. That's the thing that stands out to me looking at these, but possibly quite good. We'll read through Splendid Dominio and then Burlone Gato. So Splendid Dominio deals damage to enemies directly ahead, inflicts Shadow Blight, and deals bonus damage based on the number of buffs the user has. The maximum bonus damage is given when the user has 15 or more buffs. So the way I follow this readout is that this always does 80 times 11 hits of damage. Then it does up to 15 hits depending on how many buffs you have, and each of those does 25 damage. And then it always does one final blow of 1175 damage. Overall, pretty good, about 2k damage, just without any buffs, and then you can increase that substantially, maybe get up to 2400 or so, 2500, if you have all of the buffs possible. And that's before counting the Shadow Blight damage, which is listed at the end here under special effects. Lasts 21 seconds, good duration. Every 3 seconds or so, you get a 41 damage tick. So this looks pretty reasonable. The SP cost, or as the devs have labeled it, skill energy cost, is 5670. You can also share this, and the cost goes up to 9072 with a shareable point cost of 5. I don't see this as being a particularly desirable skill to share, but the fact that it scales in damage based on how many buffs you have, you never know. Karina, her shared skill, Xander's shared skill have exploded in popularity and usage. But of course, one of the things that sets them apart is, unlike Gala Chelle here, they don't have a maximum on how many buffs you can stack and take advantage of in the way that she does. So that might be a limiting factor for her. And 5670 isn't cheap on a first skill. For Gala Leonidas, I believe his first skill does less damage, but the SP cost is something like 3,800, between 36 and 3,800, so a lot cheaper. As I mentioned, as a rapid fire mana caster, you kind of want to stay in place and just fire 4 strikes continuously by holding on the screen. Those generate about 90 SP per hit, so it's going to take a little while before you actually charge this up. That being said, the Shadow Blight lasts a while. Shadow Blight Punisher is an option in the Shadow element that's probably a little favorable actually compared to Scorch Rend, because one of the issues with Scorch Rend and Leonidas in Flame, as well as Seimei, who now causes Scorch Rend, is that the Punisher print for that is a 5-star print, but Flame characters, a lot of them already want to be using another 5-star print slot on Burning Punisher, and that actually gives you 30% Punisher compared to Scorch Rend's 25% Punisher on its Worm print. Basically, you have too many Worm prints that are competing for too few 5-star slots. In the Shadow element, in contrast, one of the premier or most common afflictions is Poison, which comes on a 4-star Worm print slot for Punishers, and is a nice 25% Punisher at 4-star. So it's a little easier to slot into a character both Shadow Blight Punisher as well as Poison Punisher. There's just fewer competitive Worm prints in the 4-star slot compared to the 5-star slots, and that makes this a little bit more possible. All that to say that maybe having a source of Shadow Blight like Opera Karina, or now Gala Chelle, would actually be pretty beneficial in Legend Kai, and certainly wouldn't hurt in lower difficulties of Kai Yan. But one of the things that we'll see with Chelle as we read her next skill is that she's lacking a Dispel, and I think that that's going to make it a little hard to fit her into just every team for the lower difficulties at least. So let's read through Berlone Gato and then we'll talk about that. Reduces the strength of the target and nearby enemies, and reduces the strength of enemies in buff zones. It costs 15,120 for skill energy or SP, which is, again, expensive. Not quite triple her first skill, but considering you want to use this 5 times to get this damage reduction zone around her to get 5 Royal Pride stacks, that is expensive, and getting all 10 in a match, unless you're going well into Berserk in Legend difficulty, or maybe it's just really hard and lasts a long time, I don't know that this will happen all that often, at least for all 10 stacks. What this skill does is reduce enemy strength, but it only lasts 5 seconds, so reduces the enemy strength by 30% for 5 seconds, and then reduces the strength of enemies in buff zones by 5% for 5 seconds. That's really short considering how long it takes to cast this skill. What I have to imagine looking at this skill is that maybe Legend Kai has some really OP attack that you want to use this right beforehand, because that strength reduction is going to matter a lot. The fact that she also has damage mitigation in 2 of her ability slots makes me think that Legend Kai is just going to be very punishing with how much damage he deals. And that kind of fits with his character and his design. He did have that battleground on Master difficulty and below, which makes you take more damage when you're standing in the battlegrounds and also deal more damage to Kai. So that's kind of my interpretation of this, but that remains to be seen. But as far as the lower difficulties go, here's the problem. So for Master difficulty in particular, that's the most obtuse of the Kai-Yan battles to get into. Expert and Standard, they're really open-ended. I think Gala Chelle will be perfectly fine. Just throw her into co-op, go into pubs, throw her onto a solo team. I'm sure she'll be able to clear with relative ease. But Master's thorny, and for co-op, there's 2 popular strategies. One of them revolves around 3 Veronica and 1 Mitsuba. It's the faster strategy. It takes about 20 seconds to clear Master Kai-Yan, but you need a lot of specific setups for both of those characters, specific shared skills. Sha Wujing's shared skill for Mitsuba, you need Gaunan Krenna, the Water Easter Bunny Dragon for her. And for Veronica, you need a critical damage backliner, you need a couple of defense boosting shared skills, and you need Feline Hospitality, a Monster Hunter Wormprint. And you need Galacat Sheath, a Gala Dragon, and Veronica's a Fire Emblem character. So you can see how that strategy is not accessible to everyone, even though I would say it's probably the most effective for farming Master Kaiyan. The other strategy that's quite popular is 1 to 2 Belina, plus a Grace, plus another unit, usually Patia, to kind of support the Grace and make sure everybody is very tanky throughout the run. And 1 to 2 Belina, I say, but nowadays you can get by with 1 just fine. Before version 2.0, 2 were usually used for safety in case one of them messed up. You kind of needed the other Belina because you needed a lot of dispels in that fight, and Grace is usually pretty occupied keeping up life shields, although she can make things work for you, regardless of the team that you use. But there aren't a lot of flexible team comps that are very popular in Master Kai, and so I'm just thinking for co-op, sure, because she's new, Gala Chelle is going to get a lot of shine. People are going to want to play with her and run into her in lobbies, and we'll be very excited about that for a while. But I do wonder for her long-term viability. She's in this same vein of shadow buff zone characters like Dragalia Victor, Opera Karina, Nevin, that has been happening for a while now. And on paper, I don't necessarily see here something that really makes it so that players would want to have her feel she's a must-have in the team. The damage mitigation is nice, but it takes a while to ramp up for her. And Shadow Blight, a lot of people in pubs don't even run Shadow Blight Punisher because it's not a common affliction. So at lower difficulties, and Master is really what I'm thinking of, I don't know that she has an obvious home. Now, maybe she's strong enough that, you throw 4 Gala Chelles on a team and somehow you immediately clear using a cheese strat. That remains to be seen as well, but I kind of doubt that that would actually work any better than the Veronica strategy. And probably not as well because her damage doesn't seem to scale that much. The buff scaling is interesting though, and the fact that she can deplete the overdrive gauge so quickly is interesting. Maybe she could get some really fast breaks on Kaiyan and kind of keep him broken for large parts of the fight, changing the pacing of it. But just on paper, I don't really see it in co-op. And then when it comes to solo, the problem with Kaiyan, and one of the reasons on Master difficulty Belina and Grace are so ubiquitous, is that Kaiyan puts these shields on himself that you have to dispel twice. One dispel removes the shield visibly, but he still has a buff on him, and it'll come back if you don't use another dispel. And that makes it so that only characters who can really dispel rapidly and multiple times in quick succession are able to combat him effectively, such as Belina, Nobunaga, Valentine's Hildegard, Grace. And right now, Gala Chelle doesn't really have that. So to fit her into a team, when it's already hard to fit in poison enablers, I don't know. I don't know if you can get everything you want in one team combination in solo play. Like, you could probably throw her on a team that's already using Belina and Grace, but I don't think that she would tip the scales for you to where you couldn't clear before, and now just by throwing her on your team, now you can clear, because she doesn't really do anything that's super necessary to clear Master content. She's not a dispel enabler. Her Shadow Blight will set up some punishers for you, so that's good. And maybe the damage mitigation will come in handy, but she's also ranged, so by default she's taking more damage than melee characters. Right now for Master Kaiyan, I use a Belina lead with a Patia and Grace, and then I tend to throw on Kurin as my last adventure, but that's kind of the flex slot. So if I were to think about it for myself, that's who I would probably replace with Gala Chelle to give it a chance. And it already clears just fine on its own. I don't think her being on the team will really change things. So looking at Gala Chelle, I think it all comes down to how effective she's going to be in Legend. And that's probably a good note to end the video on, since that's just a few hours away at the time I'm recording. I wish I could give more of a definitive verdict, but from what I'm seeing here, it's just going to come down to the Legend mechanics. Like, I don't see a way that she fits into Master exceptionally well. I think the tried and true strategies are likely to prevail there and continue to work out well. Legend, based on what I've seen of Gala Chelle's kit, there seems to be some element where Kaiyan just does painful amounts of damage, and her damage reduction is able to help you get set up there. And maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised, as I was with Gala Leonidas, and how effective she is at dealing with that. but that remains to be seen, as so many things do. Anyway, y'all, that is going to do it for today. Definitely let me know if you're summoning for Gala Chelle in the comments below. I promise you I'm not going to be greedy, and I'm not going to try a double summon for her and for Persona. I'm going to give it a shot with Legend Kai with just who I have and see how it goes. Probably just try to do solo this week because it's kind of a busy week, and then come to co-op at some point in the future. But that is going to do it for today. Thank you as always for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.